What is going on, everyone? This is Eric coming at you from just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. And today we're going to be discussing one of the longer trade breakdowns in the series. This is going to be also an oddity because it's the Jon Gruden trade. Yes, that's right. Head coach Jon Gruden. Back on February 18th, 2002, Jon Gruden was traded from the Oakland Raiders at the time to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, this trade was one of the bigger trades that we've seen in a long time, and we saw Jon Gruden, like I said, trade to Tampa Bay in exchange for 4 draft picks. Oakland was able to acquire Tampa Bay's 2002 first and second round picks, their 2003 first round pick, and their 2004 second round pick. So how did this work out? As you can tell, it worked out. A lot of stuff happened. And we'll break it down draft by draft. And yes, this video, just full disclosure here, it will be one of the longer ones. And perhaps more importantly, it did take out a couple more trade breakdowns I was considering doing. So, So we're going to start in the 2002 NFL draft, where Tampa Bay's first and second round picks were the 21st and 53rd, respectively. So Oakland ends up trading the 21st pick alongside the 89th pick to the Washington team in exchange for pick 18. They didn't hold on to 18 for long, though, as they shipped it along with the 158th pick to the Atlanta Falcons in exchange for the 17th overall pick. So with the 17th overall pick, Oakland would select cornerback Phillip Buchanan. Now, Phillip Buchanan, he would spend 3 years as a decent player. He wasn't always a starter. He wasn't always a backup. He started some games, but not every game. And like I said, he was decent. He wasn't great, but he wasn't bad. Before he ends up getting traded. We'll get to that trade later on. I'm not going to jump around like I normally would do. With the 53rd pick, they would select offensive tackle Langston Walker. Now, Langston Walker, he appears in 66 games, starting half of them. And he was average over 5 years. He wasn't great, but he wasn't horrible. So, yeah. So Atlanta, with their haul here of their 2 picks, they would pick running back TJ Duckett. So, Duckett, he's just a decent backup running back for 4 seasons in Atlanta. And they end up trading him. Now, we're not going to discuss this trade because obviously there's no room on the board to. And they're a minor team in this trade. And it was a minor trade. They got a receiver for him that lasted 1 year in Atlanta. And with the 158th pick, they went with quarterback Kurt Kittner. So Kittner struggled over limited playing time while being on the team for just about 2 years. So now we get back to Washington because remember, they got picks 21 and 89. And they would trade pick 21 to the New England Patriots in exchange for 3 picks, the 32nd, the 96th, and the 234th. So I did go into a little bit more detail about this because this opened another one of my potential trades with the Patrick Ramsey trade. So with the 32nd overall pick, the Washington Redskins selected quarterback Patrick Ramsey. So Patrick Ramsey was something. Ramsey, he spent essentially 3 years as the starter in Washington, and he wasn't great. So he gets benched because he struggles, but towards the end of his playing time in Washington, injuries started to kick in too, and he ends up requesting a trade. Now, this trade we will also get to shortly. And Washington ends up sending picks 52 and 96. Remember, they acquired 96 from New England to the Baltimore Ravens in exchange for picks 56, 87, and 159. With the 56th pick, Washington would select running back Ladell Betts. So Ladell Betts, he was a serviceable backup running back for 8 seasons in Washington. And he had a career year in 2006 after Clinton Portis got hurt early on in the season, so he stepped in. But other than that, he was pretty much just a good backup. Washington then would send picks 89 and 118 to the Jacksonville Jaguars in exchange for pick 79. And with the 79th pick, they would go with cornerback Rashad Bowman. So Bowman, he was a backup for 2 years before being cut. With the 87th pick, Washington would select wide receiver Cliff Russell, who caught 2 passes over 1 season before being cut. With the 159th pick, they went with safety Andre Lott, who was a backup safety for 3 seasons before being cut. And with the 234th, they would go with defensive end Greg Scott, who would be cut after participating in 3 games, but didn't do anything. New England, with the 21st pick they had acquired from Washington, would go with tight end Daniel Graham. And Daniel Graham was a pretty good player, actually. So he would spend 5 years in New England, and early on, he was plagued by inconsistency with drops, but he would grow and become a better pass catcher, but he was always a really good blocker. And he's actually a member of the Patriots All-2000s team. He does have 1 or 2 Super Bowl rings. He's got to have 2 Super Bowl rings with the team. So he would end up walking, and he got a pretty big deal. He hung around the league for a while. I completely forgot about him, in all honesty, before this. Closing out the 2002 draft, we have Baltimore, who with the 52nd pick would go with defensive end Anthony Weaver. And Anthony Weaver, he was a decent starter. He wasn't great, but he was decent over 4 years before leaving the team. And the 96th pick they would trade, which we don't really need to get into. Now, Jacksonville, the last team involved in the 2002 trades, would use the 89th pick to select linebacker Akeem Aodell. And he was a solid linebacker for 4 seasons before leaving. He wasn't elite, but he was solid. And then with the 118th pick, they went with tight end Chris Lazar. And Lazar, he caught 4 passes over 3 seasons before being released. Again, he was more of a third-string tight end, but he hung around for a few years. That's better than some guys do. So that was the 2002 draft. So again, remember, Oakland gets the Buccaneers 2003 first-round pick. Now, interesting fact, if you didn't know this, the 2002 Super Bowl was actually between the Buccaneers and the Raiders. And the Buccaneers would defeat the Raiders in the Super Bowl in pretty much a blowout. So Tampa Bay, their pick becomes the 32nd pick. So Oakland gets the 31st from themselves and the 32nd from Tampa Bay. And with the 32nd pick, they would select defensive end Tyler Brayton. Now, Tyler Brayton, he was a decent player. He didn't develop into as good as they'd hoped with a first-round pick, but he was a decent player over 5 seasons before walking. So now we get to 2004. And remember, the Raiders have the Buccaneers 2004 second-round pick. So Tampa Bay regressed in 2004, and it was expected. You know, they had to make a lot of salary cap decisions. So, you know, they end up getting rid of some key players, and they started dealing with injuries. So that second-round pick becomes the 45th overall pick. So with the 45th pick, the Raiders would select center/guard Jake Grove. So Jake Grove, he appears in 54 games, starting in 46 of them as an okay player for the Raiders before leaving. So not horrible, but not great. Still pretty serviceable enough. Now, I didn't really go over Jon Gruden, so let me quickly discuss how he did in Tampa Bay. So Gruden, like I said, he got Tampa Bay to a Super Bowl victory in his first season in Tampa Bay, obviously against his former team, the Oakland Raiders. But he also kind of knew the Raiders playbook, so a lot of people were saying, oh, well, you basically knew what the team was going to call. And he also, a lot of people were saying, oh, well, he took Tony Dungy's team and won a Super Bowl with Tony Dungy's team. Again, and I mentioned that the team dealt with a lot of salary cap problems and injuries, which led to them really struggling after the Super Bowl win. But they would rebound in 2005, but again would lose in the playoffs in the first round. And the following year, they would get Jeff Garcia, finally getting Gruden a quarterback that he could have and enjoy. But the team would go 9-7. And then in 2008, The team would start off hot, going 9-3 before losing all 4 games in December, which led to them basically firing Jon Gruden because the defense just completely collapsed. And he actually owns the Buccaneers' career wins record with 57 wins. That's probably going to get broken at some point, and he's also a member of the Buccaneers Ring of Honor. So Gruden obviously left his imprint in Tampa Bay. Why did I do that there? Because that's technically the end of the Gruden trade. But now we get to the 2005 draft. Now, I mentioned Phillip Buchanan was traded. This is all because of Phillip Buchanan. So, for the most part. So, in the 2005 draft, Oakland would trade the aforementioned cornerback Phillip Buchanan to the Houston Texans in exchange for a 2005 pair of draft picks with the 47th and 78th overall picks. So, in Houston, Phillip Buchanan himself was not great. He was okay for just over a season before being cut. Again, he wasn't great. So Oakland would actually end up bundling the 47th pick along with a pair of their own picks with 182 and 185, sending all 3 of those picks to the New York Jets in exchange for picks 26 and 230. Now, Oakland, just like they did in 2002, would end up trading up yet again, sending picks 26 and 105 to the Seattle Seahawks for the 23rd overall pick. And Oakland would also end up trading pick 230, which they had acquired from the Jets, and a 2006 fifth-round pick to the New England Patriots for pick 175. So with the 23rd pick, the Raiders would select cornerback Fabian Washington, essentially replacing Phillip Buchanan. Now, Fabian Washington, he spent 3 okay seasons in Oakland before the team acquired a veteran in free agency, and Washington would request a trade, which would be granted. But we will get to that shortly. With the 78th pick, they went with a linebacker, Kirk Morrison. And Kirk Morrison, he was an above-average tackler, and he would be a starter for the team for 5 seasons before being traded, which we will again get to shortly. And lastly, with the 175th pick, they went with defensive tackle Antaj Hawthorne. And Hawthorne did not play much over 2 seasons before being released. He never really made it in the NFL, but he was a good player outside of the NFL. I think he played in NFL Europe and like the World Football League or something like that. And he was pretty good. He never really made it in the NFL, though. Now, for the Jets, for what they got, with the 47th pick, they drafted a kicker. Granted, it's a kicker we all know who still plays in the league today. They went with kicker Mike Nugent. And Mike Nugent actually, he was a decent kicker for 3 seasons. And then in his 4th season, he ends up getting hurt. And they end up liking the replacement more than Nugent, so they let him walk in free agency. But again, he was a decent kicker for just over 3 seasons for the Jets. With the 182nd pick, they would go with running back Cedric Houston, who was just a backup running back for a couple seasons before leaving the team. And they would trade the 185th pick. We won't get into that one. Now, Seattle, remember, they got 26 and 105 with the 26th pick. They would draft center Chris Spencer, who started 70 games over 6 seasons. He was a decent player, but he never really stood out. And with 105, they go with offensive tackle Ray Willis, who, again, he would start 26 games over 5 seasons. Now, he developed more later on in his career for the team, and he was known as a very good run blocker before he would leave the team. Again, Seattle always seems to need offensive line help, and even back then, and those were 2 decent picks for them. And with the 230th pick, New England got into the 2005 draft, they would pick quarterback Matt Castle. I went into a little more detail on Castle just because he, again, just like Ramsey, was a trade breakdown I had planned for the future. So while in New England, Matt Castle spent the first 3 seasons as a backup before taking over for an injured Tom Brady early on in the 2008 season, as we know, and he had a career year in 2008, almost leading New England to the playoffs. They went 11-5 and missed the playoffs just because the AFC was so good that year. And he ends up getting traded on the franchise tag. And we will get to that shortly. I know I have 3 trades we're going to get to shortly, don't worry. So now we get to the 2006 draft. And Oakland's 5th-round pick, because remember, New England got a 5th-round pick in the 2006 draft from Oakland. So Oakland's 5th-round pick becomes the 136th overall pick. So with the 136th pick, the Patriots would select offensive tackle Ryan O'Callahan. So he becomes a decent backup offensive tackle for 3 seasons before leaving the team. Nothing great really ever came of him, but... So now we get to the Patrick Ramsey trade. So Washington would send quarterback Patrick Ramsey to the New York Jets in exchange for a 6th-round pick, which would be the 173rd pick. So for the Jets, Ramsey literally threw one pass for the Jets before being cut. Or after one season. He was a backup. He didn't do anything. They didn't need him. And they didn't like him enough to keep him. Now, Washington, with the 173rd pick, would select safety Reed Dottie. And he would spend 8 years in Washington. Now, he was a starter for half of those years. So about 4 years he started. And he was known specifically as a special teamer. But Washington fans know him for taking over for Sean Taylor after he passed away tragically. He became the starter to replace him. So he will always live on in Washington history as the guy who took over for Sean Taylor. Anyway, let's get on to a little bit brighter note here. So in 2008, Oakland would trade Fabian Washington to the Baltimore Ravens in exchange for pick 125. So the 125th pick was utilized to pick wide receiver Armand Shields. And Armand Shields never played in the NFL. Again, a Raiders pick that never panned out. Now, for Baltimore, with Fabian Washington was a good player for 3 years. That's pretty much all there is to say about him. He never stood out, but he wasn't bad. So he was a good player. Now we get to the 2009 draft, and this is the Matt Castle trade. So New England would send quarterback Matt Castle and linebacker Mike Vrabel to the Tennessee Titans for pick 34. So Matt Castle in Tennessee, in Kansas City, sorry. I don't know why I wrote Tennessee there. I do apologize for that. That is supposed to be Kansas City. I was thinking of Mike Vrabel today. So in Kansas City, Matt Castle, he spent 4 years in the city of Kansas City, and he was okay. So he had a great 2010 that saw him make the Pro Bowl, but he was just okay other than that. In his last 2 seasons, he ends up dealing with injuries, and then he gets released. Again, one-time Pro Bowler. Mike Vrabel, he was a decent player over 2 seasons before retiring. He didn't get the sacks like he had in New England, but he was still okay. He was basically a starter, but he was rotated off a lot. With the 34th pick in the 2009 draft, the Patriots would select safety Patrick Chung, and he had a solid 4 years in New England, starting 30 games over those 4 years. Now, he would end up leaving in free agency for 1 season, and then he came back to the Patriots, but we're not going to discuss part 2 of his career in New England. Lastly, we get to the 2010 draft. And the 2010 draft saw Oakland send linebacker Kirk Morrison and pick 153 to the Jacksonville Jaguars in exchange for pick 108. So with the 108th pick, the Raiders would select wide receiver Jacoby Ford. And Jacoby Ford was a speedy kick returner, but he was a subpar receiver over 4 seasons for the team. Now, Kirk Morrison for Jacksonville was good. Not great, though. So he would spend 1 year as a starter, but then he would walk after the season, which is part of why Oakland wanted to get rid of him. Again, he was a good player. He was a serviceable starter, but... And with the 153rd pick, they would select defensive end Austin Lane. So Austin Lane, he was an okay depth piece for 3 seasons before being cut. Like I said, this was a longer trade breakdown. And again, I do apologize for writing Tennessee, not Kansas City there. But this was a Jon Gruden trade. A coach being traded doesn't happen much. And it led to a whole lot of action. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you didn't get too lost in it. I know this was a longer one, but I didn't want to break this up into like 2 or 3 different parts. But again, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a great rest of your day. This was the Jon Gruden trade.